Hello and welcome to this new episode of the Hessian Scrum. After a long time, we finally managed to get Vatha of Mefitis or Mefitis for you Americans out there to join us. Hello, Vatha.
Hello, Nick. Great to be here. Great to
Yes,
talk to you.
great to finally have you here. You recently released, off scourings on, through us. Let's dive in. Tell us what was going on between Ember Dawn and off scourings that led to the creation of off scourings that it is.
Oh, sure. Well, Ember Dawn was very much a labor of love that took a period of a few years because not only were we trying to write some new material, but we also had to figure out the entire process of actually realizing that in recordings. So by the time we finally finished it, it was just, we felt so tired of working on those songs in a way, but also so energized because it finally felt like a fully realized product that we had put out. So the process for making off scourings just kind of came right on the tail of that. We felt we were very ready to start making something new, something different. And I guess it began life as kind of a number of experiments where we were just thinking, let's try a different idea. Let's write a song on bass instead of on guitar first, and that would be the one Meridian Artifact. Or Pendath had the idea, let's write a metal song using the idea of a shepherd's tone, which is when you have a pitch that sounds like it's indefinitely increasing or decreasing, and it kind of cycles on itself. If he was here, he could explain it a lot better. But that would be how the album actually starts out, is it's got this kind of endless descending sound to it. And perhaps not being an authentic shepherd's tone, I think it has a very unique and impactful effect when you start the record.
Yeah, you know, um, you know, there's been, we've seen you guys talk about this on Facebook. A lot of your songs tend to come out of these very rigid ideas, but you don't seem to adhere to them. The shepherd's tone that you guys use isn't a real shepherd's tone per se. Is there a need to kind of break these rules, or how closely to the rules do you stick?
Um, yeah, I guess it's more so that we start out with some kind of principle or idea, what's going to inspire us this time around. And then when the rubber meets the road, so to speak, you have to adapt yourself and realize, okay, well, does that actually sound good or not? And is that going to fit our purposes when we're trying to make this into a real song? So, similar concept, we had a moment in one of the new songs, Witherways, where we wanted to try writing something where like every bar was a different time signature in the riff. And so we tried putting it together, and we were, kind of hashing it out on guitars, the two of us. And eventually we realized, okay, well, this was a good idea to start with. It got us something down on paper, but we couldn't ultimately achieve the exact idea we wanted, or else it would have cost us having an actually good riff.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that. So in terms of composition, both of you, Pendath and you, essentially form an entire band with all the kind of range of instruments that you both master. So do you have much input on the drums? Does he have much input on the vocals? How does it work?
Yeah, definitely. I will admit that I am very far from a drummer. So while I don't necessarily go in there and produce him as a drummer, I of course have written parts for drums, and as these songs come together, I might have a riff and I'll put my own drums over it. Let's say program drums for a demo, right? And this is my sort of vision of it. But of course, it's a guitarist writing drums. How good is that going to be? It's kind of like you're just making riffs with the drums, and you don't know what a drummer can bring to a part. And what actually makes sense to be played on drums. And then likewise for the other example you gave there, when we're doing the recordings and I'm doing all the vocals, I have my whole vision of how I want that all to be. but sometimes Pendath will kind of be there, backseat driving me, so to speak, and he'll have ideas for how to like produce some of the vocal parts. It's, I think, pretty important if you want to get vocal parts that are as good as the ones that we got on off scourings, that somebody's there saying, "Nah, do that better."
Yeah, I mean,
That's basically how it goes.
do you believe that there's a limit, to how much an individual can kind of edit themselves and be a good judge of their own performance?
I do. I think you can get to a point where you kind of acquire a bit of tunnel vision working on your own thing, and it's hard to still hold on to the perspective of how you would hear it if it wasn't you. So, especially, the DAW can abet a kind of tendency to over edit things, chop things up and make every note absolutely, absolutely perfect. So sometimes the two of us have to balance the other and make sure we're not getting too carried away with, digital perfection.
All right, so we've seen in this album, right, that compared to Emberdawn, you guys are straying more and more away from metal.
Is that a question, or you just want me to agree?
No, I'm gonna let you elaborate. You know what I mean?
I don't know what you mean, but yeah, I'll elaborate. um, I would say that a bit of extraneous influence is starting to creep in bit by bit, and this is actually a nice opportunity to bring up the new material we're working on right now. So we have an EP that's planned that I think is going to bring some of those other influences than metal to the fore, even more than ever, because basically we've said what we wanted to say with these genres on these first two albums. And I think it's time for us to consider something that's a little bit more vivacious of a style, let's say. So, off scourings, you could definitely see that. And I think a big part of it is that we want to get a bit more into the sound design of it as well and really think about how does this music sound and how does it impact you, and not just you know just relegate ourselves to being trapped inside the very limited timbres of metal. Death metal in particular is stuck in this kind of morass of low mid-range murk that we're just so tired of hearing. So anything to get away from that and then continue to write something that's characteristically Mephitic would really be what we're going for.
Yeah, let's talk about sound design because there's a lot of sound design going on off scourings. Some very weird sounding synths, a lot of layered guitars. Some guitars almost sound like synths at sometimes. There's a whole lot going. So please tell us more. You know.
Oh, sure. Well, I guess it just comes from really the origin of our sound design. I think goes all the way back to when we were writing songs together when we were teenagers, and you know how when you're trying to make something, let's say late into the night, you've got your amp turned to the very lowest possible volume, and what you get then is you get the acoustic sound of the guitar is just as loud as the tinny crappy little distorted tone coming out of your speakers. And so we grow up with this kind of sense that when you're playing certain guitar parts, not everything, but certain parts, should really have that clean layer that gives it more articulation, that lets you actually hear the notes. And so that was kind of the first way we started experimenting with layering in a lot of clean guitar. And as time went on, we just thought of more and more ways to kind of accentuate what was already there. It's not really something where I want to have kind of audio novelties and sort of like circusy distractions. I get very wary when it gets to that point. So if we ever get our sound design and it's going too far, like there's kind of a thing here and a thing here, and almost like a 3D movie, it gets to be just a little too much novelty, then I have to take a step back and dial it back a bit. But we're very excited to always be trying new sounds that really complement and then even extend further the ideas that we're trying to put down there with just the riffs.
Mm. Yeah. So, even, disregarding all the kind of, the synths and a lot of the sound design stuff you do, your guitar parts are very, not always counterpoint, but just very loose sense of harmony. And it's really rare to hear both of you play the same parts at the same time.
Right. Well, I guess that comes from us both just having, a decent level of skill on guitar, and then both also having an idea of what we want every song and indeed every riff to be. And so maybe going back to our earliest days, we would write songs with just like one guitar part, and then the second one would just be added on as kind of an appendage that didn't really have its own reason for being in the song there.
Mm.
And with time, we realized that I think a riff can do and say a lot more if you build it from the ground up with two parts. And with time, we also tried to experiment with making the parts more and more different from one another, rather than just have one guitar is doing a tremolo melody and the other does a parallel harmony on top of that. We try to see if the parts could be a bit more contrasting, doing different things that complement each other. And then, I got to credit Pendoff. He's the one who has the really, really particular ear for making sure all those arrangements work right. And, in the moment, you might say, oh, come on, there's no need to be that particular about it. But you go back a week, a month, a year later, and you listen to it, and you're like, I'm very glad we made that correction and made that arrangement all work out correctly.
All right. Speaking of Pendath, I have one word I'd like you to elaborate on: arrangements. Arrangements. What can you tell us about the arrangements? Because we've had discussions about this in the past.
Can you maybe give me an example?
Well, talking to Penduff, Penduff is, like you said, very particular about arrangements, right? And because you guys have a very complex sense of harmony where it's almost alien sounding at times, you're really outside of the kind of basic diatonic box. So, how do you handle arrangements? When do you allow yourselves to be a bit more dissonant, a bit like jazz musicians would say, out? And when do you really have to rein it in?
Got it. Yeah, I think a lot of that is pretty intuitive. Um, when you want to choose kind of which brushes you're going to use to make this picture, we just have a sense of when things should be like pretty diatonic and pretty easy to comprehend, and when we want to have something that gets really, really out there where we can bend the rules a little bit. Like I would say on off scourings, we allowed ourselves a lot more parts where we could try something pretty new in terms of harmony, where it was accepted that this would be kind of a dissonant, sort of like the band Unholy kind of doomy section. And therefore we could try a lot more things than we normally would venture with a typical metal riff.
Yeah, because we've in Mefitis, I don't think I've ever heard, maybe in the Birth of Tragedy, but a very basic kind of minor scale riff or anything that's been done before. So it leads me to my following questions: like, how important is being original for you?
Oh, well, nothing could be more important, I think, than just making something that's true to yourself. That's the realization of the ultimate vision that you want to put out there in music. And that doesn't mean you go into every song saying, like, let's make sure this is really unique, really original, but rather you say, And it's pretty simple for us at this point to just say we really want to do the next thing that's a culmination of our ideas thus far.
Yeah.
So to do anything else would just be selling yourself short. You know, it would be dishonest to not be original. And I don't really think it's something you have to actively work on to do. You just have to think like, I'm somebody with my own ideas and perceptions about music, and this is what I want to hear. It's basically it.
Yeah. Despite, there are a lot of bands out there who are very alien sounding. I've heard all kinds of crazy scales, ultra Locrian, super ultra Locrian, seven flat, half diminished, all this kind of stuff. But what I really love about Mefitis is like, despite how adventurous and ambitious you guys get, the music at its base is always extremely sentimental.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you work to achieve? Like, okay, it's cool, you can have all these crazy parts, but it's got to mean something.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, yeah, I would say that's a pretty astute observation. We definitely have an interest in the more out there ideas in music, the more discordant concepts that you can put on a record. And like I said in one of the previous questions, we have tried to employ some of those ideas more and more bit by bit. But yeah, it tends to be something we compartmentalize a bit. It's just one tool in our toolbox. And what we ultimately like to hear is those bits that kind of jump out and then make it all sort of contextualized, makes it all make sense and makes it all worth it when you listen to the whole song. When you go back to something like At the Gates, let's say, as a beginning listener, it might have seemed pretty alienating, and it probably was for the time. But once you understand their intuition and what's really happening in those songs, there's a lot of, sentimentality that jumps out of those songs. And, it's pretty easy to see how much of an impact that's made on us.
Yeah, definitely. So, one thing, we've seen over ever since Ember Dawn was released, people tend to kind of confuse a lot of your influences, say you sound like XYZ. Well, I've noticed with you guys, you have the kind of obvious canon of the bands you like, but then you're also very astute, adept at picking up stuff from kind of not lesser known bands, but bands that are not as highly regarded from in the kind of death and black metal canon, and really doing stuff with them. If you mind me saying, for example, Septic Flesh.
Yeah, very much so. Because, of course, we kind of were raised listening to a lot of those classic bands that you allude to a bit there. When we started out, all I really wanted to do was somehow make a band that combined Morbid Angel and Emperor. That was like our very earliest days. I just like wanted to somehow figure out a way to reconcile my two favorite bands. But definitely by the time we were working on our album material, we had kind of grown in a way where we were so aware of that music already, and it still played like a really big part in our writing and our thoughts on music. However, we were looking outside for a lot of different influences. You mentioned Septic Flesh. We were listening to, I think in the Ember Dawn days, there were a few records that might seem kind of atypical, like first Primordial album. We were listening to the first Allegiance album quite a bit. Just stuff like that. Just had more things we could pull from, and more ideas that inspired us. And it didn't mean you have to take it all wholesale, but there's many albums that you can find something really interesting and really inspiring going on there, and not necessarily the whole thing is something you could chalk up as a classic, but you could find quite a bit of value in these sort of B tier or C tier bands, as it were.
Yeah, definitely. I want to go back a bit more to Ember Dawn. All right. So, one YouTube comment on the, on the album stream that I absolutely love is that what some guy saying, what's great about this band is that there's here's the black metal part, here's the belt death metal part. It's all very not streamlined, but you have your own language and you kind of take, all those elements freely. And then you guys call that dark metal. So let's get into what is dark metal and why.
Right. Well, yeah, I do like that observation. To some people, it might be very easy to pick out where we're trying to do this sound or that sound at different times because they have a commonality, a shared language, and they like understand what all the influences are. But if you can see past that and try to understand what this dark metal vision is, then you can really get, I think, what we are trying to achieve. And then to answer what dark metal is, it's something that was born out of us not wanting to just continue calling ourselves something like blackened death metal or deafened black metal or God knows what, because that genre hybrid doesn't exactly have a super positive association to it, and it's always been kind of confusing and doesn't seem like it really sells what we're trying to do. The point is not to play one genre with little bits of the other genre, or like that YouTube commenter said, just have different parts that are different genres, but it's supposed to really feel like a cohesive whole that never truly is one thing or another. And so dark metal naturally is not our invention as a term, but we kind of liked to invent a new canon for ourselves where sort of alternate history where you look back at Bethlehem with their dark metal album, and that could have been the next Venom or the next Possessed, when they said, look here, we are starting our own new thing, which is what bands used to do all the time. In the 80s, everybody had a genre. But for some reason, we're so like calcified in the same like 5 genres in metal. It was really annoying to us to have to just say we're only this one thing. And I will concede it's been a little bit harder to sell this music without just saying, oh yeah, it's black metal, oh yeah, it's death metal, because you don't instantly find your crowd. But thankfully, there's enough of a niche in people who like all this kind of music and recognize the kind of references that we might allude to in our songs, that I think people have, bit by bit taken to the dark metal thing and started to understand what it is, what it means.
Yeah, I always find it funny when people say, "Oh, these boys are trying to invent a genre like everyone else." I'm like, mate, I've got Sinoff CDs that say dark metal since 1990. You know what I mean. So
Yeah.
it's always been there, in one way or another.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I think Eternus from Norway used the term. The band Avenger from Czech Republic, they literally called one of their albums like Bohemian dark metal, something like that. Sorry for doing disservice to them by misremembering. But there's been a few bands that have used the term and kind of used it in a way that they're sort of kindred spirits with us. And then, of course, there's bands that have been called dark metal that we don't want to be associated with, the kind of corset core bands, so to speak. But definitely, Bethlehem is a band we love, and their sound is not exactly what we do, but they similarly had kind of a hybrid going for them where you couldn't definitively say it was just this or that. So I think they were right in declaring that this was a new sound and they were going to stand behind it. I think that's a pretty bold move to make.
Yes, definitely. So, when we talked about, how you compose Mefitis songs, we always, there seems to be always two kind of recurring themes. There's one where you build a song up from scratch, and then there's the other one, which I love, is what you guys have called maximization. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So this is just a play on minimalist songwriting or minimalism as an aesthetic, right? Uh, we would go back to songs that maybe we wrote very, very long time ago that were, pretty rudimentary, let's say. And we would say, there's something really cool here in the structure of it and some of the ideas we put out here. But to make it, sit on the same level as the new material we're writing, we're going to maximize the material that's there. So early example of this was actually Widrum Hymn, and then one of the B-sides to Widrum Hymn, the single, Battering the Opidum, were both born out of this process. They were both written in 2008 or 2009. And we came back to them and said, these are pretty exciting songs for us to work with. And let's just, now take what we can do on our instruments and, with our ears, basically, and realize these as something that's just as exciting, but has a lot more happening for you to listen to. And, it proved to be such a success with that first release that we brought in a couple more tracks, like notably Sunstead Blight, the final track on Off Scourings, unless you have the CD. It's the final track. And that was a very early song that we kind of took maximalizing to its greatest extreme. I don't think any song we ever do will be quite as transformed as that one. And then, without giving too much away, we have a third LP on the horizon, which was created with a very similar approach. It's material that we had been writing for years and years that we finally put our maximalizing ear to and made into what essentially is like a one album work. It'll remain to be seen what I'm talking about, but that's coming out at some point fairly soon, I hope. Maybe in a year.
Yeah, a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah, it'll you know how it is. It multiplies as time goes on.
I'm happy. I've heard the demos, 10 out of 10. But let's talk about something I absolutely love about your music is just the way you play around with words and the lyrics, the themes. It's just insanity, battering the Opidum. That's a title I love. Grieving the Gestalt. So tell us a bit more about that.
Oh, sure. I mean, song titles, sometimes they just come to you and it's a bit of serendipity. And sometimes you labor over just the title for hours. You're sitting there thinking, like, all right, the song is about this, but how do we express it in just 3 words, right? So something like Grieving the Gestalt definitely took a lot of time and a lot of beer, I think, to come up with that title. But eventually, we had just reached a nice pair of words with a nice sounding alliteration that seemed to like really encapsulate what we were going for. And yeah, it just sounds cool. When you tell someone about a song or they're going to go tell their friend about it, I want the song to sound cool. I don't want to make like a Filth Void type song title, Cosmic Decay or something, just like 2 words that have nothing to do with each other slapped together because you just thought both of them were sort of cool in concept. No, nothing like that. I make sure that every title and as many of the lyrics as I can have some kind of meaning and are written in some kind of direct yet insightful, kind of incisive language. And to do that, I draw a lot from kind of more Anglo-Saxon derived words and try to find things that aren't just clinical, like Latin-based sounding words. That's where you get something like Widrum hymn. Is you find this very archaic English word, Widrum, which is sort of like a madness or insanity, and then you pair it hymn, and then that has kind of a cool rhyme structure to it as well.
Yeah, definitely. And also your vocal approach is very sparse in general. So, and you have the tendency, every line has to be dynamite, it has to be a banger. Like that's the impression I get, when you're writing your kind of vocal melodies.
Not a lot of melodies yet, but we are getting to that. Spoiler. But yeah, as far as the vocal patterns, the variation of pitch in harsh vocals, the rhythms, syncopations we plan out. Yeah, it all should be as impactful as possible. The vocals shouldn't just be a delivery for lyrics that sort of just keeps a, steady eighth note, quarter note kind of tempo over the riffs. That's a very big pet peeve of mine in extreme metal in particular, is when the vocalist has too much to do and then he's just blathering out over the music constantly, usually using like a very consistent like metronome rhythm, like rah 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 rah. Like it just does very little for me musically because it's not particularly musical. So I've always just been somebody who writes pretty succinct lyrics, and therefore I have to make it work over, a lot of music. So everything is very planned out, very contemplated as far as where the lyrics are going to go. So that often means that I'll be doing a song and I'll have to do retakes of certain vocals over and over and over until I finally have the right rhythm. And then, of course, I go back and listen to what I did and say, oh, wait, that's still not what I wanted. And then you do one more take. And then that's the one.
Yeah. It seems to be that a lot of your kind of, the harsh vocals, you're very attentive to kind of the pitch of each of them. Is every part, like in terms of pitch, laid out precisely?
Right. Well, it's not that premeditated, but yeah, over time I've tried to be conscious of the different parts of my vocal range and different things I can do with my voice. And, we'll get to each riff and just kind of have an intuitive sense of which style, which technique best suits this part. There's, I guess, the kind of cliche way to think of it is like if you have a fast kind of tremolo part, you might do like a kind of high pitched vocal because that's just normally what you think of with that style of riff. And then you get to like a slow, crushing riff and you bring out what we call the ogre voice, where it's not exactly like a low death metal growl. It's more so like kind of a chest guttural, just pushing out as much air as you possibly can. But, we try to think of that and not do the exact same thing every time. You don't always want to get to a slow part and bring out the same style because, that runs the risk of being predictable. And then, at the same time, I try to one up myself on, every performance and every release we do. I want to be able to bring something a little bit new to the table and I want to challenge myself. And I think with off scourings, that definitely shows in that there was a big leap in the quality of the vocal performance, if I may say so, of myself, compared to the first album. Not that anything was wrong with that, but you just gain confidence using your voice with time. And then that allows you to think of new ways to use it.
I still miss that scream on Ember Dawn. Like it's that crazy scream.
Our friend called it the Floretti scream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was so random, but it's perfect, you know.
Yeah, well, hopefully people get to see us live, and I'll get to bring that out.
Nice. So, one thing that seems to be very kind of consistent throughout both albums, well, not consistent, but a tool that you love, one of your favorite aesthetic tools, the kind of harmonized mouth synths, the ahs.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, I guess that just comes from back in the day writing songs that we envisioned with actual keyboard parts. And then we did, in fact, have a keyboardist in our early days of playing live. And I think you can even go find us an old live video of us playing with the keyboard player named Steven. And, he did a fine job. But as we got to starting to make music for what would become our albums, we were thinking over, like, okay, how do we get the right keyboard sound for us? Like, it has to be something unique that not anyone can just go into, say, Reason and pick out a patch and say, oh, that's what they use. Ha, now I have it. So we got the idea, well, why don't we just sing it? Because, we're a big fan of what I think Dan Swano calls the monk vocals that he contributes to a lot of his recordings. I think he did some for Dissection, for instance. It's that layering, kind of probably taken maybe from Corthon of Bathory. He got the inspiration to do that. Layering one voice, and in our case, it's multiplied by two, so maybe a little better, over and over until you have this kind of canned choir coming out over your songs. So for us, that was just a way to achieve like this really grandiose sound, a lot bigger than what it would be if it was just the two of us singing at the same time, because we could build all these voicings on top of each other. All right, sounds good.
All right, what you just got to hear was a new sample from the upcoming Mefitis EP, called, well, whatever. You tell us when you can.
Well, its working title is just MDB. We don't know what that means yet, but that's what we're working with right now. Some astute viewers might have an idea of what that stands for.
Yeah.
But yes, this is an EP that we're putting our finishing touches on. It was all recorded to a 4-track tape machine, as it happens. And that kind of gave us an opportunity to try something a little different with our approach to songwriting. We basically said, let's write something that we could actually do to tape if we had to. And thankfully, we have a reel-to-reel in our possession. So that's going to be the next release we put out, hopefully this year. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how it turns out and see how people react to it.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just happy that it's not called MAB.
Yeah, we wouldn't think of calling it MAB.
Yeah. So, let's go into another part of, Mefitis that is absolutely great. Well, two parts technically. The rhythm section, your bass playing and Pendath's drumming, for those who really pay attention, there's a lot going on there. And it does maintain, it's not like a lot of nowadays metal where it's all submissive to the guitars. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
All right, surprise, motherfuckers. I'm here.
Who's
I got to
this?
jump in. For all the listeners, I'm kind of busy right now, so I'm jumping in and out. But to comment on the drum parts, I as a drummer, and if you've got any competence, you end up playing drums for the bands you're in, because bands are always looking for drummers. But first and foremost, I would play guitar in the band. But I love drumming. I approach it secondary to the guitars. And I also approach it like a producer. Because especially with metal, you've got the guitars incredibly distorted on their own. The riffs are not clear. You've got to come up with drum parts that can emphasize what's there in the riff. But then you also have to find places where you can add your own flourishes and create interest in the rhythm part.
Right. Well, thank you very much. That's great to know that you're here with us, and I don't know how that happened, but yeah.
Me neither, man.
Yeah,
but here I am.
You just came out of the Mefitic ether. It sometimes happens. When we're writing on our own, sometimes we'll just like hear a disembodied voice saying like, "No, don't do that. That's like a minor second in the bass or something."
Every instrument comes down to arranging it, right? You've got to make every instrument have its place in the song. I hear a lot of drummers that they have chops. They want to add fancy ideas everywhere. But let's say you've got like 16th notes on the guitars, and then a drummer wants to add triplets. Does that sync up? A drummer that isn't part of the writing process might not fully understand what's there in the riff, and then accepts that kind of rhythmic dissonance, as it were. But Vatha and I have a full understanding of these songs, and you've got to approach the drums in a way that's going to bring it out. And when you're not like sample replacing everything and quantizing everything to a grid, it's hard to make things clear, especially more complex ideas. And so the arrangement is key, along with the performance, obviously, to making everything come out clearly in a mix.
So, on the Hell's Headbangers website, where people can buy, your vinyl for those in America at a good price, there's a little description about the album, about how it's a scavenger going through kind of lost civilization. Can you tell us a bit more about the themes, without revealing too much?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that was actually a small blurb that we contributed for the sale of the record that somebody could put up there. It's a pretty decent encapsulation of what kind of themes we wanted to cover with this, because something we're interested in is a lot of this recovering lost knowledge and lost artifacts of the past, but not necessarily having the shared language to understand what it is, and yet at the same time kind of discovering an almost universal language that maybe exists in our subconscious, to understand on kind of a symbolic level what those artifacts might represent. So to that end, if you own the CD or the vinyl, you would have it with the runes that we designed. I call them runes, but they're not truly runes in the Futhor sense. That each of which is supposed to represent each of the songs. Not everybody knows this, but it was part of the concept of the album. Was we wanted to have kind of a pictorial representation of the main idea of each track. And what that started out as was just kind of making a small caricature of that song's central idea, but then going through a process of simplification of each symbol and then distilling it down to something that could be almost universal, that could almost like tap into an understanding of that symbolism without needing to know the context. So I would say anybody who's looking at that description on Hell's Headbangers, hopefully that has some intrigue left to it, and you want to know more about what this album means.
All right, there's one thing I completely forgot about, which is, I absolutely loved it when it came out, and it's so badly done in metal nowadays. The Witherways music video.
Well, Pendoth might still be here. He would have a lot more to say about it.
Yeah, I'm with you still.
All right, so tell us more about it. How did it happen? What does it mean? And why?
Why did we make the music video?
Yes.
Well, we were in a conversation where people were saying metal music videos are hackneyed and worthless and the same type of shit over and over again. A bunch of guys jamming in a warehouse
or a forest.
Pardon me, or a forest. And it's not a medium video it's not a medium that we've really utilized, but I think it can really draw the listener into the world that we're trying to create. Of course, in the case of Witherways, we informed this Croatian team. They're called Croatia Infiltration, about what we wanted, and then they had their own interpretation. So it's not necessarily a perfect reflection of the world that we had in mind with Offscourings, but they did a damn good job. And where do I begin, man? We if Vatha cares to explain the lyrical theme of Witherways, that's more or less what we sent to them and asked them to represent. So take it away, Vatha.
That's right. So we gave them a bit of a treatment of what we wanted depicted in this video. And, they already had quite a compelling portfolio of urban exploration photos and videos that they're doing out there. A lot of, military bases and facilities from the former Yugoslavia. And I just came across one of these photos and found it to be such an apt match to the kind of aesthetic that I imagined for some of these songs. There's a big theme of people of later generations finding kind of lost technology and lost laboratories and other kinds of structures and going in and exploring them and unearthing new technology. Basically, Offscourings, the entire thing is many cycles of mankind reaching kind of a new level in its technological development and discovery, and then something about that causing our own undoing, without giving too much of the subtext away. So there's kind of an image of a group of people, or maybe just a solo explorer, going into this sort of laboratory or sort of a research facility and finding all these things he doesn't understand, and it's completely dilapidated and part of a culture entirely detached from his own. And we explained this to the guys at Crow Infiltration, and I think they got a very good understanding of what we wanted, and they kind of ran with it. And using our ideas and even using some of the aforementioned runes we created, they managed to unite some of the aesthetic of our music visually with their own expertise in exploring these kind of abandoned sites. And in doing so, I think they really created a very enthralling image to accompany the music video that, we certainly couldn't have come up with entirely on our own. And then to augment that, of course, Pendoth wanted to have some two-dimensional art as well, which makes an appearance in the video at various points.
Oh yeah, the animation that you guys use is absolutely fantastic, and it fits in so well.
Yeah.
And even some parts where it's kind of overlaid with the actual, videos. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a totally different, not even a team, but somebody that I found online. I wish I could remember her name, but it was something Eastern European that I can't pronounce. But we can credit her in the video or in the description of your video when you post this. But I certainly wanted to take the literal title and have something represent that. And so you'll notice watching the video that there's a plant withering away. And when I contacted her about that, she didn't even know where to start. She was coming up with all kinds of ideas, like maybe I'll film a plant actually withering for a month and then break it up frame by frame and draw that out. I don't think that's what she did. I think she used a bunch of different stock footage of withering plants that people had done already and then drew it up, but it's all done by hand. And what's interesting is the plant itself is all her animation. And then she'd done a digital painting of this cave in the background. I'm like, okay, that looks great, but I'd love if it were actually painted. So I reached out to another artist online from the Philippines, and she took that digital background and actually painted it. And then I sent it back to the animator who did the withering plant and had her superimpose the withering plant on. It was a process, man. It was a process. And if I could have had my way, not to undermine anything that Croatia Infiltration did with their actual footage, but I always dreamt of having an entirely animated music video. I think it's a beautiful format, especially hand animation with real drawings. But we would have ended up spending $50,000 on it. So it had to be a multimedia type of thing to even work. And still then our budgets, you couldn't justify it from any kind of business sense, but we got a beautiful product out of it that we're proud of and we feel represents the world that we tried to paint in off scourings pretty well.
Yep. So please buy more off scouring CDs and vinyl to help these poor boys because they haven't monetized. They haven't monetized the video as well. It's free. So
it's never getting monetized, man. We do this stuff because we love doing it. I'm never worried about but do continue buying CDs and vinyl. I won't tell anyone off from doing that, but we're never going to really monetize it. That's just not why we do this. And the type of music that we play, you can never expect to monetize something like that. You have to do it because you love it.
Yeah, we know you guys are on SoulSeek and you got all our stuff on there. And you won't let me download my own music without being your friends. So we know that's all going on and it's great. Anything that gets the music out there, that gets the dark metal out there, it's great.
I've used SoulSeek, to share Hessian firm releases, with like reviewers because sometimes I just don't know where I left the MP3s, so it's all good. There's much love. All right, so I think there's one final thing I want to talk about, something that makes me genuinely angry. We all love the band Demilick. They are great, they're top tier, fantastic band, but people have a weird obsession with associating you with them. And this goes beyond, the kind of Turka artwork. For those who are watching, you can check out the Turka episode that we previously did. But why do you think that, any kind of musical witness that you have is always associated to Demilick and not Vedbuen's Ender, for example?
Well, it doesn't go far beyond the artwork.
Yeah.
I think the visual representation that you have for an album, especially a debut, informs the way people are going to hear the music and drastically. And we didn't go to Turka saying, hey, could you recreate Nespith with a slightly different color palette? We'd actually found this piece of art like in an old art book from Vernon Hill, which had a bunch of writhing bodies. And we knew that Turka was good at that. So we reached out to him, and it ended up kind of looking, or some people would argue, really looking like Nespith. But you really can't put it past people to see the art and hear the music colored by that. But maybe more generally, we're playing something that at the very least resembles death metal, and we're doing weirder arrangements. And, you couple those two things together, the comparisons are inevitable. But, just the other day, we had a comment on our Rate Your Music page comparing us to Krallis, which is definitely not one of our influences. But if we got some people thinking we sound like Demolic and some people thinking that we sound like Krallis, we're probably doing something right, because people don't know what the fuck to do when they hear our music.
Yeah, let alone people thinking we sound like King Crimson.
Yes. We saw that quite a lot. Yeah, you know what? Let's talk about that. The cover art, for Off Scourings, right? Because a lot of people were shocked, surprised, and didn't know what was going on.
No, well, that's a perfect place for Pendot to chip in, since it's entirely his work.
Yeah. Oh man, I gotta hop out of here in a second. How do I give a good snippet of the thought process behind that? Okay, well, we're talking about the Embradon artwork and how much that colored people's perceptions of the music that we played, even if it wasn't accurate, inherent to the music itself. We, inevitably, however much we like Demolic, got fed up with that. And so we wanted to do something that completely stripped any frame of reference from the listener and veered away from the typical, acrylic painting that you see in metal nowadays and in the old school. Of course, I have to concede, doing our portraits like that got a whole new set of comparisons, one of which most obviously being King Crimson. You just can't escape the comparisons. It is what it is. But the art style itself, that monotone, is just two colors representing a face down to its most, like, it's a realistic depiction, but it's its most stripped down possible representation. I found that kind of fascinating. I developed the ability to draw that way, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could do the entire band like that? I think it would look intriguing. And the blue background, this isn't really going into the why, but the blue background is actually the background from Turka's painting. We took the sky from that and then shifted it around in its position and changed the color to be blue. So there is still a painting there, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a bit of continuity that nobody would know about.
No one would ever know about until they hear this episode. But, I do want to point out, some people got the impression that it was some low effort fucking Instagram filter that we put on selfies of ourselves, and that couldn't be farther away from the truth. I drew all of these by hand, and it's a very interesting art style, because when you look at it before you fill in all the black ink, it looks like almost like topography, like a map. You can't even see how it'd be possible that a face would come out of the outlining of these shadows. And then when you fill it in, there it is. There is somebody's likeness in its most simple form.
No.
Yeah, and beyond that, also, I think we just wanted to say, after all the perceptions that we've gotten for our music so far, and everything we've run into, with being a new act that's out there, out in the world, like we wanted to take a bold move and put ourselves right there up front
Yeah.
and say, this is who we are and this is what we're doing. And we're not going to, adulterate this or water it down in any way.
And that leads us. There are two extra faces on that. The cover. What can you tell us about those two?
We grew up with those guys. They're part of the band. I mean, me and Vatha are the key songwriters. We're the visionaries behind Mefitis, but they've been with us from the start. Troy, who you'll see on the right of the album cover, he's the co-founder or founder of Fabricant. I've been writing with him forever. He contributed some solos to the album, and he's playing with us live. And Forrest on the left side wrote a riff in Castling in Sediment, and he was also part of Fabricant, and they're part of the band.
All right, I think that pretty much rounds us up. So, any final statements?
Yeah, and you can see all four of us on June the 17th.
Where?
If you're in LA, you're in the greater LA area. What's the place called, Penda?
It's some fucking sports bar.
Watch Major League Baseball and listen to dark metal at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. They've got
They've
got good food. Come check us out. The information will be on social media because we're too inept to remember our own promotion.
So yes. So before I let you guys go, I just want to say three things. First of all, those are not synths. Those are actually harmonized vocals. You can confirm that, right?
That's correct.
That's right.
Secondly, that's not an Instagram filter. That's actually hand painted.
Also correct.
Third, no, this is not a Demi-Lick clone.
No, it's a Voivod clone.
Exactly.
No, stop.
All right. That's literally what I wanted to say. So you can get, if everyone still listening, you can get off-scouring CDs from us over here. We ship all over. Vinyl, Europe, Asia, and Africa from us. America from Night Rhythms and Hell's Headbangers. Thank you very much for joining us, guys.
All right. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you a lot.